Bio2. This chapter is chapter 29 and it's entitled Comparing Invertebrates. So we have officially made it through all of our invertebrate groups of animals. And so now we are going to take a look, kind of almost a look back, a little bit of review, a little bit of new information on all the different invertebrates and kind of how they relate and how they've kind of come to be how they are today. And so in order to understand how they are today, we have to look at how they've evolved over time. So that's what the first section in chapter 29 is, invertebrate evolution. So first we're going to start with the origin of invertebrates. So invertebrate fossils dating between 575 and 543 million years ago have been discovered in parts of Australia and China, and the ones that have been discovered in Australia were some of the earliest and most primitive animals known. So we first started seeing our invertebrates appear in the fossil record as late as 575 million years ago. And again, these are some of the most primitive animals that we have kind of come to know to see in the fossil record. And kind of the characteristics of these fossils, most of them were flat and kind of shaped like a plate, and a lot of them were segmented. They had bilateral symmetry, and we know that they lived on the bottom of shallow seas. They were made of soft tissues, and they absorbed nutrients from the surrounding water. So this is kind of taken from clues from the fossils. We were able to kind of distinguish this amount of information about the types of invertebrates that were living at the time. So these were the major characteristics of the organisms that were living at that time. And some of these animals may have had photosynthetic algae living within their bodies. So we've kind of mentioned that with some sponges and some corals of today that kind of have this type of relationship with the algae living with them. And then some of them may have been related to soft-bodied invertebrates as well. So that's kind of, again, going back to what we were talking about with kind of going back up here with the soft tissue. So there are some that have been related to the soft-bodied invertebrates. And they were probably simple and had little internal specialization. So they were probably very similar to the sponges. If you remember, they didn't really have much specialization. Pretty much water came in, brought its food with it, then water went right back out. So those were our basic kind of first animals, our original invertebrate animals. And then now we're going to get into a time period where they began to diversify. So by the beginning of what's known as the Cambrian period, which occurred around 544 million years ago, some animals had evolved things like shells and skeletons and other hard body parts. So they weren't just kind of those soft tissuey animals that we kind of come to think about. And one of the best areas that we have found these Cambrian fossils is an area of Canada known as the Burgess Shale. So that is going to be an important thing you're going to need to know, is that there's this area up in Canada that kind of shows us some of the best fossil records of this time, and it's known as the Burgess Shale. So it's a big, very diverse area with a lot of interesting fossils from this time period. And then it has showed us that by this period that our animals, again, they've had specialized cells, tissues, and organs. And during that time, the ancestors of most animal phyla first appeared in the fossil record. So in this time, really a big explosion of diversity, and all the animals that we know today, their ancestors can kind of be traced back to this time period. So not just the vertebrates, or not just the invertebrates, maybe some vertebrates as well. And then again, some of the animals of the Burgess Shale had many characteristics of our modern day invertebrates, and so they showed things like body symmetry, there was segmentation, there was a skeleton, whether it was an endo or an exoskeleton. They had a front and a back end, so remember anterior and posterior, probably with some cephalization there. And they had appendages that were adapted for many functions. And then the phylogeny, so kind of this is going way back to our first semester here, which is just how we characterize things based off kind of evolutionary similarities. So many features of modern vertebrates evolved during the Cambrian period, so a lot of these things came to be, such as tissues and organs, patterns of early development, body symmetry, cephalization, segmentation, and then the formation of our three germ layers in a column, which again we've mentioned throughout our second semester here. So a lot of this came to be in the time period that we know as the Cambrian period. And then if you remember, going back from first semester, this is what is called a cladogram, and again this just shows us how things have developed over time, kind of going by evolutionary traits. So this is how we group things evolutionarily, and then we look, you're going to need to be able to answer some questions again, like which animal does not have specialized tissues, and we could say that that is the sponges because the tissues comes after the sponges. And then where did a pseudocolum first come to be, and that would be with the roundworm, so be able to read and identify kind of characteristics on this chart. So then this is just a little more specifically showing when our column actually came around, because remember our roundworms, our mollusks, and our arthropods all had a true column. And then this one just shows that echinoderms are closely related to the vertebrates because they are deuterostomes as well, because the rest of the invertebrates are protostomes. So that's it for our first section of chapter 29. Let me know if you have any questions.